Okay, first impressions, Jamie did say it would be different with all of you looking up at me, and I gotta say, this is wonderful. What a blessing it is to be here today with all of you. Just bear with me here a quick second. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Moments like these matter to me, not because of who is speaking, but because of what is being shared and the community that is gathered together to hear it. A few years ago, I was working construction, and I got to tell you, this was one of the most boring summers of my life. I got to be in charge of a site where I got to watch dump trucks come in and out every day and dump dirt, and then I got to watch a bulldozer push it. Riveting stuff. But I remember the one day I was sitting there looking up at the pile as the trucks were coming up and dumping, and there was a clump of dirt, probably about the size of a football, that started rolling down the hill towards me, and sidestep it, don't want to get hit with a bunch of mud. And I looked down at it, and sitting there was a circle about this big, solid green. I thought that was strange because this dirt was coming from somewhere in Toronto. And so I thought, oh, maybe a bottle cap, but whatever. Take it down, take a look. And what I found was this. Now, from back there, doesn't look like a lot, but what it turned out to be was a penny from 1952, or 1852, apologies. It's 167 years old. Older than the Confederation. For those of you that don't know what the Confederation is, that essentially means this penny is older than Canada. It features Queen Victoria on the back. She ruled from the year 1837 to 1901. And adjusted for inflation, this penny is worth a whopping 37 cents. Which doesn't sound like a lot until you apply that logic to like $100, and then suddenly, yeah, $100 is worth $3,700. Yeah, that's considerable. So I'd like to read, before I move on, apologies, I'd like to read the parable of the lost coin from Luke 15, verses 8 to 10. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents. Let's sit with that image for just a moment. A woman notices that something is missing. Not everything, not most things. One coin. Something small, easily overlooked, and easily dismissed as insignificant. And yet she refuses to let it stay lost. She lights a lamp. She sweeps the house. She searches carefully, and when she finds it, she does something unexpected. She rejoices over finding a single lost coin. This is not a story about carelessness. It is a story about attentiveness, about what happens when absence is noticed and taken seriously. Because what strikes me most about this parable is not the joy at the end, but the effort in the middle. It's the searching, the refusal to just shrug it off and move on. The belief that what is missing is still worth being found. And that question of being noticed, of being sought, of belonging even when something feels out of place, is one that has shaped my own experience and faith in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. This passage called to me because I once was a lost coin. Some of you may know that I grew up in a Catholic family. I attended Mass regularly at a small but deeply devout parish. The congregation skewed older, many of the faces having worshipped in those pews for decades. But there was a quiet, steady peace within those walls. It was the kind of place where silence didn't feel awkward or empty, but intentional. A place that invited reflection. It was hard to imagine a better environment for sitting with Scripture and listening for God. And yet that congregation struggled. New members were few and far between, and even now, years later, that small community continues to dwindle. The church struggled to keep a priest for more than a few years at a time, and just as relationships began to form and trust took root, the local bishop would rotate a new priest in. The community would lose its footing, attendance would waver, and slowly the sense of cohesion would begin to fade. Then, eventually, the cycle would repeat. It wasn't a lack of faith, it wasn't a lack of reverence. It was something quieter and harder to name, a sense of impermanence, of connection constantly interrupted, of a community that wanted to belong but struggled to hold on to one another. It became increasingly difficult to find solace in a community defined by ever-changing leadership. Again and again, just as relationships began to form, a new priest would arrive, a man who, through no fault of his own, had no history with us, no lived understanding of the rhythms, needs, or wounds of the congregation. And he was suddenly tasked with making decisions that could, and often did, shake the community to its foundations. We were continually encouraged to gather, to build, to reach outward, and bring in those who were lost. These were good and faithful calls, but they rang hollow when the very pillar meant to anchor the community was constantly being called away. How were we meant to build lasting relationships when the ground beneath us never stopped shifting? The church did not come to us. It did not offer the stability required to truly form a community. Instead, it asked for growth without roots, for commitment without continuity. And over time, that absence took its toll. This tension, this slow erosion of belonging, was not the only factor, but it wasn't an insignificant one, when in 2011 it contributed to my decision to step away from God. Not in anger and not in rebellion, but in weariness, in the quiet sense that something essential was missing, that I no longer knew where I fit within it. In the years that followed, I found myself on a long and winding spiritual journey. I tried, in earnest, to fill what I can only describe as a God-shaped hole in my life. I searched widely, read deeply, and listened carefully. And what I learned over time was that every answer I uncovered, there were a dozen more questions waiting behind it. Often, those questions were not welcomed. I encountered more than a few spiritual leaders who seemed less troubled by uncertainty itself and more troubled by the fact that I was willing to ask these questions at all. Questioning, I learned, was not always seen as faith, seeking understanding, but as something dangerous, disruptive, or disrespectful. And yet, the questions persisted, because they came not from cynicism, but from longing, from a desire to believe, to trust, and to belong. Eventually, I found myself settling into agnosticism, not as a declaration of disbelief, but as a kind of truce. I wanted to believe that there was something more, something beyond what I could see or articulate, but I could not find the answers in my heart and soul were searching for. It was a place of tension, of openness mixed with uncertainty, of hope held at arm's length. And yet, here I am before you today. As many of you know, I have been attending here since Jamie officiated mine and Lisa's wedding back in 2022. That moment was quietly transformative for me. It was my first real encounter with the culture here at the Church of Christ in Waterloo, and it left a lasting impression. Jamie did this for us freely. Even though he had met me maybe twice, 3 times beforehand. There were no hoops to jump through, no conditions attached. His only request was simple. If we had the time, we might join the congregation for service that following Sunday. And so we did. And since then, we've barely missed a week. What stayed with me from that exchange was the way that the church had built itself. There was no pressure and no expectation, no checklist to complete, no pressure, no conditions to satisfy. Just a brief, almost offhand invitation offered to us as he was headed out the door. Like literally, the door was open. He had 1 foot out. He was ready to go. I walked into that conversation braced for a lecture. Instead, what I received was a simple request delivered with the same ease and familiarity as a neighbor inviting you over for a meal. The contrast was jarring. To say I felt a moment of whiplash would be an understatement. I came expecting correction. What I encountered was welcome. I expected the rod, and what I was offered was an open hand and an embrace. And I don't believe that moment is unique to me. I believe it is a picture of what the church is called to be. Because the woman in Luke 15 does not wait for the coin to roll back to her. She does not scold it for falling. She does not stand in the doorway explaining how coins ought to be more careful. She lights a lamp, she sweeps the house, and she searches carefully with intent. And when what was missing was found, she rejoices. That posture matters. Meeting people where they are does not mean lowering standards or abandoning truth. It means recognizing that belonging often comes before belief and care must come before correction. It means understanding that people do not always walk away from faith in rebellion. Sometimes they drift, sometimes they grow weary, sometimes they simply stop feeling noticed. And when that happens, the response of the church matters more than we often realize. The Apostle Paul puts it this way in Galatians 6, verse 1. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a transgression, you who will live by the Spirit should restore that person gently, but watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Restore, not expose, not shame, not lecture from a safe distance. Restore gently. That gentleness is not weakness. It is awareness. It is the humility to remember that none of us are immune to wandering, to falling, or being lost in ways that are not loud or obvious. So the question before us is not whether people will come through the doors carrying doubt, hurt, or unfinished faith. They will. The real question is, how will we as a community respond when they do? Do we become searchers or spectators? Do we light lamps or do we guard thresholds? Do we offer open hands or raised rods? Because somewhere, right now, there is someone who feels like a lost coin, small, easy to overlook, and unsure whether or not they belong. And the good news of Luke 15 is this: heaven rejoices when what is lost is found. But the work of searching has been entrusted in part to us. But searching does not happen by accident, and it does not happen unprepared. It happens with intention. You have to take the time. You have to use the tools offered to you to look for these people who are just missing. In the parable, the woman does not grope around in the dark. She lights a lamp. She sweeps the house. She uses what is within her reach, ordinary tools made purposeful by intention. God has given us these tools as well. Presence. We search with presence by noticing who is missing, who has grown quiet, who has slipped to the edges. Absence rarely announces itself. We search with listening, not listening to correct or to respond, but listening to understand, listening that makes room for unfinished thoughts and unpolished faith. We search with patience. Sweeping a house takes time. Restoration is rarely immediate. People are not problems to be solved quickly, but lives to be tended to carefully. And we search with humility, remembering that we are not above the dust on the floor, but standing in it ourselves. Remembering that we were, even are, the coin that someone else is searching for. Because the moment we forget that the work of searching becomes something else entirely. It stops being an act of care and quietly becomes an act of comparison. Restoration turns into correction. Invitation turns into evaluation. And without even realizing it, we place ourselves at a distance from the very people that we are called to love. It is this subtle shift that the Apostle Paul is concerned with when he offers a warning in Galatians. He writes that those who seek to restore another must do so gently, watching themselves lest they be tempted as well. Not because we are weak, but because we are the flawed humans that God made us to be. Because the temptation is not always toward the same failing. Sometimes the temptation is towards pride. Sometimes the temptation is toward believing that we are the searchers and never the ones that are in need of being found. Paul's warning is not meant to paralyze us. It is meant to keep us grounded, to remind us that we do not stand above the dust, but we too are within it as fellow travelers. That any act of restoration must be carried out with the full awareness that we too depend on grace. May we be a people who notice absence, a people who search carefully, a people who meet others exactly where they are with patience, humility, and joy. Because sometimes the invitation that changes a life doesn't sound like a sermon at all. Sometimes it sounds like a neighbor saying, "If you have the time, we would love to have you." Please stand for our final hymn.